Aloha and welcome to season 2 podcast with Light Diamond Creative. This season's topic is the Awakening autobiography. It's recommended to listen to this season in chronological order, although if you have found yourself on this specific podcast and haven't listened before, it must just be meant to be. You are invited to check out all of the other content, including podcast season 1, which is all about meditation, the science of perspectives and experiences through. There are a couple meditations in there for you to listen to for free as well if you would like a guided meditation on YouTube. In this season, though, focusing on the Awakening autobiography of yours truly, I'm diving into experiences of my life in chronological order, mostly, that are what I think possibly common steps that many of us go through, lessons that we learn along the journey of awakening. And so it's my hope that sharing this personal information and experience will resonate with you, maybe even help guide you as you go through your experiences. And hopefully it will illuminate anything that might be of service to you now. So in this episode today, episode 9, we are talking about the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul and awakening creativity. What is the dark night of the soul? When I think of the dark night of the soul in this phrase, I think of getting to the lowest low, hitting rock bottom, having experiences that challenge us to the point of almost not returning from. To me, this is the experience, the dark night of the soul. I did take a moment to look online and see what they say, whoever they is, on the interwebs about perspectives of the dark night of the soul. And something I came across is that the dark night of the soul, when things reach their lowest, while never easy, the dark night of the soul is an essential part of spiritual awakenings and is sure to teach you some hard-fought lessons. This is from someone online who I've not yet found the name of, but that is a quote from them. And they also refer to a man known as St. John of the Cross. Apparently, this is the guy who first coined the term or the phrase dark night of the soul. He was a 16th century Spanish mystic and poet, according to this online article. And he relates the dark night of the soul to the idea of a spiritual depression. And this person in their writing also refers to the dark night of the soul being written about in Buddhism, where it's referred to as, quote, falling into the pit of the void. This is a period of life of suffering and, deciding what we're going to do with all that. The dark night of the soul. Yes, it's pretty intense. I think that it's possible we experience a number of these in our lives. Earth is a place that can be very challenging. And with our current structures and matrices, ways of being in contemporary life, I think that these ways do challenge the spirit in and of themselves. And so the combination of all of those challenges, whether conscious or not, as we experience them, it does challenge the spirit. And then when we experience a traumatic event, I would say that definitely leads us into a period of time that we can consider the dark night of the soul. I would also include shadow work within the period of the dark night of the soul, at least in my own experience. What is shadow work? There are probably a lot of different ways to phrase this. In my experience, shadow work has been the period of time and the practice of honestly looking at oneself and disintegrating an overinflated ego by processing not only the wrongs that have been done unto us, but the wrongs we have done unto others and that we have done unto ourselves. In short, I've called it before Martha's Library of Shit from A to Z. And it was through a meditation practice starting in 2018, October, that I began to shift my mind and come into a place of being able to approach myself this way. In meditation every day, I would almost do what is called by some a life review, where I began to analyze the patterns in my life, analyze my own behaviors throughout my life, analyze those situations that went wrong, either by someone else's fault or my own. And I think that assessing ourselves and our own behaviors is really key in transforming out of the dark night of our soul. Because if we can approach ourselves honestly and with as much love as possible, approaching those situations and taking account of how they went down, why they went down, our role in those experiences, we really begin to take personal responsibility for our lives. And in the meditation practice I have been practicing since 2018, that phrase, personal responsibility, is associated with the second of 9 chakras within the 9 chakra system, Kuji-in. The second chakra, the Hara, is a energy center that we address in season 1. And as it relates to personal responsibility, meditating in that space, meditating in the Hara and exploring the concept of personal responsibility really helps us, become empowered to take mastery of our lives. Analyzing ourselves honestly, we could have someone else do that and be like, hey, please analyze me honestly. But it seems like there's so much power in doing that for oneself privately with spirit, with your spirit team, with the angels, with whoever it is that you connect with, whatever name you call them. Although we feel alone in so many moments of our lives, and I've felt that, I get it. It's even just recently I've reminded myself, no, I am not alone. Even though I might be the only person in the room or the building or the nearest 5 acres, even though I might be alone as a human, I'm never alone, because all of life is this beautiful expression of consciousness, a point of consciousness, a point of spirit experiencing the fullness of itself through a singular point of view. And so I'm not alone, and I know that now. I'm never alone. But to go through a period of, even isolation in 2020, that was a great time to do it, to dig in and to figure myself out and to go through my own library of shit, A to Z, take responsibility, even in the experiences where, like in the Ben stories I've been sharing in previous episodes, it wasn't my fault that he died. And, if you're like, what is she talking about? You got to go listen to the other episodes, okay? But even in our experience with me and Ben, even though it wasn't my fault, I did begin to explore how I played a role in the suffering I was experiencing through his loss. Now, you'll never hear me say that I regret being with him, although I recognize now that I was at a vibrational match to meet him where he was, which was a person who was experiencing mental and emotional illness despite what he looked like on the outside. I had been a vibrational match to magnetize myself into a situation where trauma occurred. And that's about the extent of the responsibility I will accept. And I also accept that sometimes we need what I and many others call a God slap. I was going in a direction mentally and emotionally, spiritually, that was not good for me. And so Ben and I seemed to meet at that point where, through experiencing each other in life and death, I became God slapped. God slap, trauma is real. God slap, addiction is real. God slap, death is real. And here is what all of those things feel like. The dark night of the soul, although incredibly challenging, can be an incubation period for metamorphosizing into something else, into something greater, using the lessons that we learn, using the gold nuggets that are available within those experiences, if we choose an attitude to see them and accept them, to retrieve them. And so the dark night of the soul can be full of gold nuggets if we are willing to open up to that idea even. And that was what I decided to do after meditating in the root chakra, meditating in the hara at the navel, self-responsibility, self-mastery, making the most of a situation as tragic and traumatic as it might be, so that he will have not died in vain, so that I can learn the lessons he had to give and that I learned through our experience together, making the most of a really bad thing. That is alchemy. That is transmutation. And for me, it didn't happen overnight. It took years. But I learned so much. And in the period of the dark night of my soul, I awakened to my creative energy. I was not able to go to the therapist very much, and I really needed it. I was given some sessions. I had a couple people who paid for some sessions, which was really helpful. I really needed help. But I wasn't able to go as much as I needed to. I didn't have the finances to make that happen, and I didn't have the ability to make more in that moment because I was too deep within depression and grief. However, I did have other tools, the biggest one being creativity itself. Some things that helped me cope that I didn't realize I didn't know that I was talented in these areas really, and I hadn't exercised them a lot. And so to come to a point of needing to develop a way to cope, I found poetry and creating art. I would be with my brother in the house we lived in while he took care of me in this time, and we would turn on Bob Ross on Netflix. We'd get the canvases, we'd get the paints, we'd get some music on. I remember even one time we had one of his friends over and she didn't want to paint, and so we gave her the remote to be the official pauser and player that could slow down Bob in order for us to catch up. And then when we caught up, we'd say, okay. And she'd press play and he would keep going. And creating art is an expressive experience that releases energy from the inside out. There are universities who are creating majors for people where they can learn about the positive influence of creating art and how it helps us traverse through mental illness, and not only mental illness, but physical illness. If someone is experiencing a stroke, how creating art and just practicing those minor motor skills can help the neurological aspects of the body reconnect and reconfigure. And in my perspective, the release of the energy, the expression itself is what is healing. I remember I didn't have a lot of art materials. I mean, I had a couple canvases and these paints that my brother and I got. And then I had a black cartridge of ink and paper and a couple small paintbrushes. And so I would sit down, in this state of depression and grief, mental turmoil. I would sit down with that cartridge and a single paintbrush, a pen, and hit the paper and not have any expectations of what I was about to make. I would just flowing, letting whatever it was come out of me to get expressed on paper. And this work, the black and white art that I created, would eventually become the foundation of Light Diamond Creative. That is transmutation. That is alchemy. And the poetry, I had so much to say about what I was experiencing, but I was afraid to talk about it, and I didn't have the skill set of communication. Not really. If you've heard me talk in previous episodes, I don't remember talking much in high school. I don't remember talking much in college. I don't remember talking a lot at all. And so I really hadn't activated my throat chakra. There were some major blockages there that I would years down the road deal with in my own meditation practice. But poetry, sometimes I would write it on paper, but I wanted it all to be collected in a single place. And so I went into the notes on my phone. And whenever I went off into a mental space that was so far away and catch a line, I would type it into my phone. And it would help me feel better. What I'm saying is that in these periods, the dark night of our soul, if we choose to cope in, I didn't always cope in the healthiest ways. I was drinking alcohol, I was smoking. But if we choose to cope in a productive way through the arts, through writing, through exercise even, or like I mentioned in the last episode, I would sit outside in the dark by myself, listen to music and sing it, and singing it helped me. What I'm saying is that the dark nights of our souls have the potential to become something extraordinary. These times that challenge us to the point where we think we may not return, that is the material that we can create a life out of. The coping mechanisms we turn to, the habits we pick up. Another example of a habit, I remember in this period of deep depression and grief, I really liked a clean space. I loved the essential oils. I loved the incense. All of that brought me back to earth. It grounded me. And it gave me something to do, to make an area that was a mess ordered into a beautiful space. That felt good. And I really hadn't tapped into that before in my life. I hadn't had an appreciation for a clean space the way that I was beginning to while coping in the dark night of my soul. There may be multiple times in our lives where we are challenged to the point of almost no return. And depending on how we decide to deal, we can begin to make the most of it, or we can keep going down the spiral till we hit rock bottom. What is it that helps you? What have you found as a coping mechanism that successfully gets you through your day or night? I know that I'm not the only one experiencing the dark night of my soul. And even at this point, I'm over 6 years down the road. I don't feel like I'm in the dark night of my soul anymore. I definitely was in the first year. I definitely was in the second year. I definitely was in the third year. And then starting in the fourth year, probably about halfway through, I started to feel things getting lighter. The meditations were really working. I was really incentivized to continue the meditations because I could feel the changes occurring within myself. But when I was going through these meditations, I also began to recognize that I had PTSD and I had been diagnosed by a therapist. And so I needed to begin unraveling that energetic mess. I needed to begin reprogramming myself, and it had to be me who did it because a therapist couldn't do it for me and I couldn't see them enough to make them. I was fortunate to come across the coping mechanism that is meditation. And meditation is so much more than that. And it's definitely a coping mechanism, a way to process, a way to practice awareness. And so finally, after years of practicing meditation, I felt like I was exiting the dark night of my soul and turning the page, closing the book, and starting a new one. And so what I know through the wisdom of experiencing the beginning and end of this dark night is that the sun does return and things do get better, but it doesn't just happen automatically. It takes conscious effort. It takes a shift in attitude. It takes rewiring the mind. And it also takes the power of will. And if we aren't willing to get better, then surely we won't. If we are willing to make the most of a bad situation, then that's a lot of the battle right there. And so I hope that if you are experiencing the dark night of your soul, that you are finding productive coping mechanisms that you can take with you for the rest of your life. And I hope that you are able to take the perspective of learning lessons from those experiences that brought you to this point, so that the lessons can serve you and so that this didn't happen in vain. Sometimes it makes me think of the karmic wheel, the karmic cycle. We keep repeating this pattern until we learn the lesson that gets us out of it. It doesn't even have to be like the universe is delivering this pattern to us. It's simply that I'm in Groundhog Day. I'm repeating this experience until I figure out what brought me to the experience and until I figure out what to change within myself that will get me out of it so I can ascend to the next level. I think there is a lot of universal interplay in these experiences, such as the dark night. And a lot of it is within. Will I change? Will I assess myself? Will I go in a new direction? Will I pick up a new habit? And if not, then you're going to stay in the cycle. And if you decide to change and you decide to be willing and realize the potential of all the lessons that you can carry with you, then things will become better. And I cannot say that it will happen overnight. All I can say is that moving forward, no matter what, eventually it won't be what it was. So I hope this serves you. I think of also the collective experience, the dark night of our collective souls on earth right now. There's so much trauma, war, manipulation, greed, so much suffering on earth right now. And in 2020, we collectively experienced the beginning of the dark night of our collective souls. And it is really reflecting on that has brought me to the point of sharing with you all, because I experienced my personal dark night of the soul before we went into the collective. And so I had a skill set I was able to use to help me get through this time. And it's that skill set that I hope gets transferred to you so that together we can collectively deal with what is going on around us and within us and make a better day. Thank you for listening. That's episode 9, Dark Night of the Soul, awakening creativity, creating as a solution, expressing, finding ways to make things better. Here we go, people. Life will never be the same. Thanks for listening. This is Martha with Light Diamond Creative on YouTube, Instagram. And if you would like to support the content and its continued delivering, feel free to donate to Light Diamond Creative on Venmo, on Cash App. I appreciate you all listening. I hope you have a great day or night, wherever, whenever you are. Peace.